keeping it simple and special, so to make it really kind of like, what is the approach? Because if we are saying, yeah, every consultancy company has a unique approach, and I said, like,
Yeah.
we are NLP people, we know what is important and how can we use multiple intelligences in the display. So that's one of the thoughts that brought us to possibly coming up with the diamond model. But it's also, as you know, Robert has so many things that are so interesting, and and he can talk volumes about it. There are already 3 volumes on it for SFM 1, 2, and 3, about the successful entrepreneur, conscious leader, and really being a facilitator for a collective intelligence. And we didn't want to replicate anything of that, but we also want to give anyone who does not yet SFM an opportunity to look in that book and get the key essence of it, and then if they want to know more, to go into it. So that's really what we want to cover today, the key essence, being in a sparkly diamond, all of the wisdom condensed into this transparency and clarity, isn't it, Robert?
Yes. Yeah. So yesterday we were first each of the individual authors and also Antonio as the illustrator. We were sharing about sort of our intention and our idea for the book, and kind of showing a little bit about what we were going to touch upon in each chapter. And so
Very.
today, I'm going to focus mostly on what's in the introduction, which of course gives the overview. So it doesn't go into a lot of the detail and the specific of application, but it does give, the bigger picture. So, and then Kathrin will be adding in, and Elizabeth is here with us too. Welcome, Elizabeth, and
thank you.
Antonio, and hopefully maybe Jean-Francois will join us at some point, but we don't know. But any of the authors who have something to add, you can always please feel free. I'm going to just begin. I think just the idea generally we would have is kind of go through the slides, which are showing, something from the book, and then see what questions you might have. Kathrin and I will also sort of give a little background to the different parts as we go. But I'll go ahead then and share my screen again.
And as you know, it is recorded, and we will make a video out of it that goes on YouTube. So if you feel more comfortable in shutting off your video camera, and then for the clarity of the recording also, we will put all of you on mute. That would be lovely. So you can help us to make a clean recording. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So this is the book, and the subtitle is Tools for Creativity, Consciousness, and Collective Transformation. And was sort of also our intention to, the idea of tools, but also those 3 areas of creativity, consciousness, and collective transformation. Kathrin has her Be the Change. I have my SFM the t-shirt. But if we look at yesterday, I was sort of focusing on the notion of generativity, and that generativity meant you're creating something new, something that hasn't existed before. And that in times especially in times like we're all experiencing right now, this is so important, because we can't just do what we've done before and expect that to work. And we can't even just incrementally make, an addition or an improvement. We've got to really rethink everything. So here we're going to bring that together with the idea of consulting. And yesterday we talked about the difference between coaching and consulting, and we're saying that coaching was more on an individual level, and it was more based on asking questions and supporting personal development, whereas consulting is more about organizational development. And here you can see that the word even comes from a Latin word which means to deliberate, and it's actually somebody who does more offering of some kind of expert advice. So a consultant gives more guidance than a coach. Um, so we would say also that consulting addresses both the problem-solving aspects, meaning, okay, it's things that we know how to solve, but also the generative aspects, these creative aspects. And this is why we say that generative consulting is really more, the expertise is more on the process than the content. Now, you might have some content expertise, of course, as well. But I know as a consultant, the many companies that I've consulted for, like auto companies, tech companies, um, many different types of companies, media companies, etc. I'm not an expert in their business, but what I can help them to do is to find their way to solve their problems. And this is why we say that collective transformation is so important. And I think that's a lot of what this book is about.
Mhm. Yes, and it's this. Often we are brought in because we are having a different thinking. Like you often refer, Robert, solving the things with the same thinking that generated the problem, as Einstein
Yeah.
is linked to have said, doesn't help. And the framework that can be given here, um, with the key steps and principles, make a whole framework, and that's special about that. What we are presenting.
Right. We showed this yesterday, and we were saying that there's these, different principles. There's these 7 steps. There's 9 core competencies. There's the 3 models that Kathrin was mentioning from the success factor modeling. Then there's these critical success factors and key performance indicators. And we were realizing that's just a lot of stuff to try to keep in mind. So one of the goals of writing the book was, can we find a framework that allows us to put all of these together? One other thing that I think is important is that we also are working with a whole organizational ecosystem. And so as a consultant, one of the things that we're doing is we're first looking at what's happening in the dynamics of the outer ecosystem. So if we look at today, you can see that so much that's happening for companies is being driven by what's going on in this outer ecosystem, the state of the economy, whatever the evolution of their marketplace is, and their own company life cycle, meaning, are they a startup? Are they a very mature company? And that these factors, these external factors, um, determine these generative areas. And so yesterday we were saying that they impact an organization by either stimulating it to grow or creating crises like so many are now, or putting it into transition. And so this is part of what we were saying, okay, these things are these external factors that are making, the companies need to respond. And then inside has to do with the structure and the capabilities of that venture. And this is where the SFM comes in. And the book helps us to see how we use things like the circle of success, the SFM leadership model, and the collective intelligence as a way to do this. And so what we're going to be looking at is sort of focusing on that. If we were to really try to help figure out how to, you know, um, strengthen this inner part here, this inner structure, because we can't change the outer economy directly. We need to respond to the need that's creating. So it's this inner sort of red part of the circle that the book is looking at.
And it's kind of like when you see here the red ring, it's kind of like it goes even more. So from here, the red ring, and where we are towards the next diamond model, the 7th step in itself, when we taught them, people were saying, but they are not unique. And I say that no, because everyone also is not a unique human being. If we take it on the overall, every one of us needs to eat and go up. There are certain best practices, but it's the how and how it's linked and how it's related to each other.
Yeah.
So the next slide will be the key slide. It's kind of da-da, the diamond model with the 7 steps in the middle, but then also how it relates to what Robert alluded to, the market situation related. So the red ring out is kind of like the market situation, and then where is the situation of the company, and then what is it that you as a consultant shall do and how you shall do it, or what helps you doing it.
So we want to kind of break down this model. There's a lot there. We're going to start with the 7 steps. So with this idea of first defining a present state, then setting an intention. So what's the direction for change? Then putting that into an action plan, moving into action. And of course, inevitably, when we start moving into action, we meet obstacles. So we've got to work with those, then track progress. And then this idea of how do we deepen those changes? How do we make sure that they are sustained?
Yeah. And one of the things that when we were looking into those 7 steps, I said, like, we need to, because it's what we can remember is kind of like 5 plus minus 2. So I said to the team, we need to find an acronym. And
That's
then my
right.
first acronym was the most boring one, which was roadmap, because I felt it's a roadmap to change. But then there was the notion of it's actually reiterating some of the things, and it's not a linear process. It is a multifaceted. And out of that, all of a sudden, Jean-Francois came up. We also have our surname. We are the Sparkadors. And all of a sudden, we thought like diamond. And that was then
Sparkles.
shaping a lot of things, wasn't it, Robert?
Yes, yes. And Kathrin started us on this journey to find what's going to be the acronym for this. And there's different ways of naming the steps. I think just like everything else in the book, that very often one of us plants a seed, and then there is a collective intelligence that refines it, which is also a bit like a diamond, meaning that you have, they say the diamond in the rough, but then you've got to sort of cut it and polish it. And I think that's what we've done with this book. So just very briefly to go over those steps and just a couple of things. We're not going to go into what the chapters cover more deeply, how each of these steps relates to those areas of, crisis, transition, and growth. But we start with that first step, which is gathering information, diagnosing the current situation. And you'll see in the book how we use different types of diagnostic tools that have also been created amongst us as members. The success mindset map that Mickey Fair and I have been developing, and the Paricio tool, which Elizabeth and I and Isabelle Weiss and Gilles Roy are developing, and their ways of gathering information. But as we say, and I let also Kathrin speak to this, that the gathering of information is not just about a kind of an analytical aspect. That's important, but this is where multiple intelligences come in as well.
Yes, it's a big part of it is hearing the story behind the story. And yesterday you heard that one of the key parts that I'm involved is in crisis, and often we are presenting with some facts, and they are not all the facts. And how can you get the diagnosis deep into where it's really true? Some of the people that that are in the lean methodology, it's kind of like walk the floor. And how
Yeah.
can you as a consultant walk the floor? And that's, for instance, the Paricio tool. It's very important. Then there
Yes.
is also when you're coming into the setting, when you hear the people, or I'm often going to the lobby, what do I see and feel from the outside? How are the people walking in the building? How are they sitting if there is a cafeteria? How are they relating when I'm walking with some of the CEOs or managing people through the door? What are they doing? So where is your ability as a consultant to get all those multiple things and then be able to filter through what is essential and what is just distracting noise?
very often the diagnostic tool we find is it's not the answer. It's really just, it's the way to open a conversation. We often like to sit and not just look at the results, but we go over the results. As a mindset map coach, where we encourage people to, like, they're sitting there with the client while they're going through it. So you're really having, we might say, your antennas out. And
And
also,
And as you will hear tomorrow from Colette with the Circle of Success, and that also what one of our friends and honoring member in the team, Magnus Cole, said, sometimes he just presents the Circle of Success and lets the people say, where are we good and where are you not good? It can be as easy as that to start. So the frameworks of those three models in the SFM 1, 2, and 3 are really kind of like as a picture helpful as a diagnostic tool.
and often we, using multiple intelligence, we won't just say tell us, we'll say show us with your body where you are. We'll say what's your picture of where you are. Just draw a picture of it. And this is where I think we really start getting that value add of generative consulting, because we do have very powerful and very interesting tools like these, but we also are using these other intelligences as well. And that, of course, leads us to the intention setting, which is once we've gathered that information, we're saying, well, where do we want to go? Now, this is where it gets really tricky in a generative situation, because you cannot define a specific result. You can't, a typical, what they call a SMART goal. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know what it's going to sound like. If you take what we're living right now, there is so much uncertainty. We don't really know exactly what's going to happen and what's possible. So this is the idea of setting it more as a direction. And then what this is showing is we're using the different levels of saying, well, what has to change? You know, if I'm going to reach a certain outcome in the environment, what behaviors have to shift. And especially a lot of generative coaching is mindset coaching. What's going to have to shift in the mindset? And that's the part that touches these levels of capabilities, values, beliefs, identity, and purpose. We'll see that Mickey's chapter is very much organized around purpose. Then we go to step 3, action planning. So now because we don't know how to get there, we've got to build that. It's not something we can just say, well, let's just look at what we've done before, or what somebody else has done. You're really doing something that is unprecedented, and that has both a lot of creativity in it, but a lot of risk in it. And so that brings an interesting challenge, and how do we organize that information?
And I really like Antonio's notion on, I often use, we are building a bridge while walking on it. So there is this
Yes.
element of Dionism and it's an element of puzzle. And sometimes we know we also have to build bridges. You know, there are value bridges. We want there, but how can we get there? We need to make steps. How can we get then the people along? So there are many, many opportunities. And as you will see in those different steps, some of them are reiterative because we need to measure, then we need to go back to the drawing board, and then we need to move into action. And what wonderful point it is that we also can come back, as you see on the next slide, in one of our key basic models that we use in NLP, which is the SCORE model: problem, desired, and then the steps in between.
And so one of the things we'll see is how we use this SCORE model as part of our planning. As Kathrin was saying, we're always wanting to move from, okay, what's the present state? What's our desired state? We break the present state and desired state down a little bit more. So we're looking at the present state, not just what's the problem. We're saying, okay, problem is going to have symptoms, and then there's causes. And similarly, the desired state is going to have an outcome, but also the longer term effect of that outcome. And then we're looking for the resources that help us to make that happen. And we're often, as Kathrin was saying, we're putting it on a timeline so that we're starting to look, put things past, present, future, short term, long term, and then really finding these different levels of resources. So the book also shows this is kind of one of our basic consulting models. As a consultant, this is really a big part of what I'm helping my client to do.
And
really,
Reza formulate and says, and the neurological levels play into here. So on which
yeah.
level are the outcomes? On which levels do we need to place the actions to get those
Yeah.
outcomes? And sometimes we know from our NLP background that the solution is not on the same level as we have the issue. We need to be more. So that's really where the systemic thinking, which is one of the key abilities that you will see, is so important for us.
And and then as we were saying, this being one of as a as somebody where we're making a plan, this gives you both clarity and flexibility because you can adapt this to any situation. It's not a rigid structure, and yet it definitely gives you all the information that you need to put that into some kind of a path. And then, of course, we start moving into action. And the moving into action, one of the key things that is important there is staying in a generative state. So this is one of those places where you're really getting very much to the heart of the difference between the generative coaching consulting approach rather and the other approaches. It also works in generative coaching. But you're constantly working on these three connections to yourself and the others as themselves, as unique individuals, but to the common intention. And that's so important because people often make the mistake of either I lose myself for the intention or it's every person for themselves, and so keeping those two is important. And then this bigger field of resources that connects. And this is, again, such an important thing. And this is not so much a matter of any particular tool as it is some of the set of competencies that we were speaking about.
And that's where you as a consultant, and I like the notion yesterday where Mickey said he got years ago the tip, don't befriend your clients. But the point is you need to be the change in the system with all you bringing in as being part of the solution for the system. That doesn't mean that you need to be best friends and buddies with your clients, but it means that with all your wisdom, you're getting part of the system. And that's where you are an equal part of the generativity, and all those tools for collective intelligence help you in achieving that.
Then once we're moving into action, as we pointed out, you inevitably start meeting those obstacles. And so we want to transform them. So this is about dealing with the challenges and the pitfalls. And one of the keys there is of course, you're maintaining this generative state, but often to do that, we go very much, and some of you already know that notion between what we call a crash state and a coach state, where it's paradoxical sometimes when people are either in a crisis or in a challenge, they want to try to act quickly. But sometimes we say, wait a minute, you need to slow down, pause, breathe, center, so that you can actually get into this place where you are able to, sort of hold all of those complex pieces together.
And as you will see on the next slide, welcoming obstacles, I often say to my clients, if I'm not facing resistance when we do changes and implement new things, we know we are not yet at the heart of the matter. By definition, when you go into the law of innovation, you will have 10, 12, 16% in the system that are saying, yay, we want that change. And you will have equally that amount who says, we don't want that change, whatever it is. So when you start to have the notion that you touch the heart of those other people, then you know that you really reach the system to a degree where the change can happen. So since I go with that flow since like the last 12 years, welcoming obstacles, like, yeah, that's interesting. It makes sense. So what is it that needs to be heard? What is your positive intention behind it? And welcoming it really enables you to stay in generativity rather than to go in a shock state and make us versus them. It's always should be us.
And in what we call the whole on, the whole of many other wholes of an organizational system, there's often going to be obstacles coming from many directions. And one of the points that we make is that generally an obstacle, or say in the form of a resistance, emerges when one part of this whole system or this holon has not been given adequate attention. And that's why we say something is needing to be held or heard, given its place is what we mean by held. Heard means, really listening. Healed means bringing some sort of resource there. So this is really something that is this where you really get into the deep work of the consulting. And this is also where we do have tools that help with this to really help to find out. And Kathrin in her chapter has a really great way of how do you do that using multiple intelligences during times of crisis. I know that I have found myself that oftentimes when people use words, it's just easy. They immediately start getting into arguments about the words. Whereas if they use pictures or if they use metaphors, all of a sudden they actually start listening to each other. So this is really where the movement to multiple intelligences becomes absolutely critical. And again, I think this is one of those key differences in the generative consulting approach. Of course, we move from there to the next step. Once we've transformed the obstacles, we're moving into action. Now we've got to assess and measure the change. And here is where it's one of the tricky things in generativity is I can't just use an existing measure. What has worked in the past to measure progress doesn't measure progress when we're going into an uncharted territory. So here's where we have to find different modalities. What's the evidence you're going to use, and at which of those levels in that pyramid is going to be the most important one. And here we're also really relying on experience as much as some kind of objective measure. What are you going to hear? What's going to let you know that you're making progress?
I like that. One of my key clients who was an engineer more than 10 years back, I said, so how will you know it's successful? He said, I will feel it. I said, like, oh, that's an interesting notion from an ex. And he says, like, okay, the people will spend like 2 minutes more at the coffee machine. The people will smile when they're coming in the building. I'm from an engineer that I thought, like, you're absolutely right. And if you're happy with that, so how can we capture that? And then we made focus groups. We made focus groups on a qualitative talk, how you feel coming to work. And so we established based on those notions how we can measure it very uniquely. We never know. So also as a consultant, be open to really listen what your client is saying, and don't be afraid to go with something. I never made a qualitative focus group to measure success, but it was what was important at that time.
Yeah, and this is also where, as we'll see in the chapter on transition, this is where collective intelligence also becomes so important, and what we call benchmarking and sharing best practices. So that you're really needing to draw, if you can't draw from history, you've really got to use that collective knowledge. And then from there, of course, once you've got a change going and in progress, you want to deepen it. So you need to follow up on that, and you need to sustain and deepen those changes. And this is where we mostly are working with things that we would call practices, which are some kind of repetitive activity whose purpose is to install or improve a pattern of behavior, and it pragmatically serves to the achievement of the goal, but often there's also a symbolic value to it. And so again, and there's many interesting examples. I know that Mickey's chapter, he gives a lot of different examples of a lot of the follow-up activities that you're having people do. And I think this is very significant also for a consulting practice. And if we look at both of those, the tricky thing about them both is you're in you're in an uncertain period because it's generative. You're doing something that's new, especially in transition. You're no longer where you were, but you're not yet arrived where you're going to be. So it's very dynamic.
And in the dynamism is also that you have people that change, possibly the people that have been starting with you doing some work or are not there anymore. They decide to, if it's in crisis, they have to leave or decide to leave. Or you are in growth, you have new people coming in, and how can you secure that? So the deepening the practice is also on a timeline of changing stakeholders with your organization.
And then from this, also this notion of practice, one of the key points there we make is that generosity has a lot to do with generativity, and that there's really absolutely no true generativity without some type of generosity, that something is being given, we're sharing. And I think this is important. So these are just a couple of our comments about that. Now, to make all of this work, when given, so we have our 7 steps, and here's where our 9 competences come. And Kathrin has already been alluding to some of them: systemic thinking, strategic thinking. We also have emotional intelligence, facilitation skills. So these are all the things that the consultant needs. And this is also a big part of generative consulting. It's not just the steps, it's what is that group of competences that you need to do those steps successfully and adequately.
Yes, so in the coming to the training in 2018, we were kind of like, how will we know that the people who have been in the training actually understood what we what we wanted to get across? So as a tool to measure the success of the training, we were making scorecards that can be seen by others. Is that consultant doing it? And we were like, okay, with the book, it is actually more like, how can we describe each of those competencies in a way that someone who is not going through a training but also gets what we want. So we have described each of those skills a little bit in depth in each of the chapters. Like at the beginning, we say relational skills are important to get to know your client, and what would be some observable elements for you, or what are some questions that you can ask yourself. Um,
And then
there
and from there, you've got to detect patterns. So I established a relationship, but we need to, detect different levels of trends and meanings and sets of data, but also in interpersonal reactions. And this whole notion of, we say both strong signals, but also the weak signals are very important. And that's why we use this analogy of a microscope, right? Not everything is directly observable. And then there's strategic thinking, which is, okay, I've got to have that focus on the bigger vision and ambition, but also see how the smaller steps are creating that critical path.
and from there it goes really neatly into the systemic thinking, which then comes into the crisis, where we're kind of like, okay, we have a whole system. We have outer stakeholders, inner stakeholders. We have stakeholders that are happy, where stakeholders that are insecure. We have all those stakeholders. And then you, in a crisis, you need to be very fast, which means you as a consultant or a consulting team cannot do everything. So how can you use the system to work for you? And that needs also the next one, a lot of emotional intelligence, because you meet with so many people in so many different concerns and perspectives, and you need to be able to hold all that, which also means you need to be really swift in communicating and how to use communication as
Yeah.
skills, not only on a verbal but also in a different matter.
So in terms of this notion of emotional intelligence, we say that there's also, it's really key that there's often going to be these undetected emotional undercurrents, what we call the shadow, or what they call the proverbial elephant in the room that nobody's
Yeah.
talking about. But then, as Kathrin is saying, then you've got to talk about it. So there
And how?
involves having the fluency of different skills and different types of ways of communicating. And then as a consultant, you're often needing to also present something. And every consultancy project that I've worked on, I've got to, I'm gathering information, I'm given a brief, I've got to present, okay, either what are my findings, what is my proposal, And so we really need to know how to address an audience using multiple, channels, not just send an email or something, but have multiple channels.
And because you're using multiple channels, you also use multiple activities and also multiple people and their facilitation. And what we mean with facilitation, one of the key skills from collective intelligence, how are you recognizing and supporting and amplifying that it's not just you, but kind of like here with the conductor, that you actually allow some of the trumpets influencing the drums and the drums influencing the violin, if I would just use that metaphor.
Yeah, so this is where you're really making sure that this idea that you're getting resonance between people, synergy, and that's one of the most rewarding parts very often. And then finally, this whole notion of influence. But I mean, if you can't influence, you're not going to be a very good consultant. But influence doesn't mean manipulation. What it means is I've got to be able to utilize, my congruence, my presence to be persuasive. If I see that something needs to shift, people are going to need to get that sense of motivation. And so we use this notion of like a magnet for this, that it's something where you're kind of working energetically. Now, as
And
Kathrin said, yeah, go ahead, Kathrin.
you're detailing in the
Yeah,
next slide how such a scorecard could look like. So we really aimed to limit it down to 3, max 5, depending on which skills,
competence.
where you will say this is the success factor, this is what it would be on a low key of such a skill, and that would be on a high skill. So you can have that. And we also formulated for each of those competencies a self-reflection question that would
Yeah,
allow you to dive a little bit deeper into it. But it's also something that you can ask someone else.
yeah. So this is where our way of both, where you can assess yourself, but we can also in the training, we're helping people to, being observed, so that a big part of this is you're really developing these underlying competencies. This is another example of from relational skills. We're not going to go into all the details that's in the book. There's an appendix that's devoted to this. But to sort of then sum up, so we have all of those things and we're using them in the service, and this is what the chapters are about, is how do we use that for surviving crisis, for managing transition, for stimulating growth. And so this is where our full diamond model comes in.
And that's, yesterday Mickey said, and he will talk on Thursday about it. Um, is it always truly a crisis? Is it always truly a growth? Is it always truly a transition? Sometimes it's all in one, and where to start.
Oh yeah.
So that model really kind of like as if you would have the 7 steps, the red thing in the middle, and then you just think about that little tuning tool, the secret box, where you can align each of those things to get the perfect alignment that then opens Pandora's box or opens the deep secrets. There is, so we want to see it as a modular approach that should allow you that sometimes we are looking specifically from one facet, let's say intention setting, and what could there be useful and what skill do I need to have. Sometimes I can look from the outside in and see, oh, okay, now that could give me a guiding principle to dive a little bit more into it.
And so I think hopefully what you see is that the goal of that model is it gives, and this is absolutely necessary for any generative process, it's giving us this combination of both structure and flexibility. And so is this is what our intention has been. And as we said, what the book then does is it shows how through those steps you are applying these success factor modeling models, like the circle of success, the leadership model, and the intelligence model. It's really quite comprehensive. But it's important is that it gives you good guidance, but it's not prescriptive.
Mhm.
So what we'd like to do is if we can invite you all if you want, you can turn back on your cameras. We have a few minutes. If there's questions, you can either put them in the chat or
And so
raise your
far, there was
hand and
nothing in the
ask.
chat. I was monitoring it, but we must have been very clear.
So that, and again, so what'll happen tomorrow is that Colette she will then say how she applied those steps, those competences specifically to a situation that was primarily oriented around growth. And then the next day, Mickey will talk about using that for crisis and be going over part of Catherine's chapter and some of his own case. And then on Friday, Jean-Francois and Elizabeth will show how they did that for transition. So I don't know if you have any questions about the model or how we use it or anything. We've got all the time we need in the next 5 minutes to clarify everything. It's wonderful to see you all, by the way, now back again. Hello, Danielle.
I see Lena Maria has
Lena
unmuted
Maria,
herself.
Hi, Robert. Hi,
Elena,
good
Kamna,
afternoon. Yes, I have a
Melissa.
question for you. Is possible to take in the future the book in Spanish?
Yes. Well,
There is one of the things about where do we start with all those languages, and we started with French because we have so many French co-authors. Then, which was one natural thing. Of course, we are thinking about German. Yes, Gudrun, hello, and me being German, and Spanish was one of our top wishing list as well. So
absolutely.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. Actually, the book is is in English and French.
French
It's
will
being
come soon.
currently translated into French. It's not done yet.
Okay, okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, Danielle.
Yes, I'm really happy to see you, Robert, and all of you. Antonio wrote a question. How does it look like for you? Does it make sense? Of course, I could say that a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, when I attended the generative consulting and at an LPU, and having this background and watching this video, this presentation, uh, it it made a lot of sense for me, and even more clearer. And I could see how the model evolved in a very simple way, as you often said, Robert, not simplistic way, of course not.
Yes.
But I I could see it and feel it at the same time, because the process, the way you did your presentation, brought me a lot of clarity, and I could see how it could be effective the
Yes.
Mhm.
way it has been framed. And thank you for that. And it's such a good reframing. It's such a good, refreshing moment for me. Thank you, Kathrin,
We,
also.
Danielle, one of the acknowledgments that we made in the acknowledgement section of the book was acknowledging all of those are practitioners of generative consulting who had given us such excellent feedback, because that's really so important. And we got so much feedback from you guys. You know, you were really helping us to get that clarity. So I just want to honor that, and all the others that came to that generative consulting
At the
first journey.
first ever training, we were 42 or 43 who were heroes going for the first journey, and I see people saying the ebook. Robert, you said it gets transformed. Maybe in a week or so we shall have
Yeah.
it. We see that we should translate it into Italian. Um, yeah, one of the key things for us was, now that we have the book, and there is one thing about having the graphics and the key graphics available, and maybe a slide deck changed into any other language, and that can be available way sooner than
Right.
having the whole 256 pages being translating in any given language. So we for sure see that. And there is the part about, those of you who have been going through the training and have an affiliation, an authorization about it, or an affiliation. That's something we definitely want to honor, that we are following on those language needs
Yeah.
that we have.
and to add these new models to that body of material that's already existed. I want to, as we get close to end, Elizabeth, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, and I just want to also just shout out that tomorrow we're starting the Tools for Resilience in Times of Crisis program. It's an online 3 hours a day program that it's not really directly relating to the generative consulting, but it does show how we use some of those tools. But I don't know, Elizabeth, anything that you would want to just add about the diamond model, or give it maybe a little preview of your chapter?
It was really amazing, because it was like if I was discovering the diamond, and I loved the way you spoke about it, and with the jaw of Antonio, and it was another way for me to discover it, and I realized how much it's very rich, how much it allows us of some possibilities. And yes, it's like it makes a synthesis of our interventions in organizations.
Yes, and Elizabeth's chapter is also so interesting, because she's showing how using it with a whole the agriculture and forestry ministry of a whole country, so you can really see how those tools can be helpful to a whole, not just a regular company, but a whole government agency.
Yeah. And I guess it's so wonderful, Elizabeth. We have been working in the weeds and everything in the book, and now we have the ability to step back and say, kind of like, yeah, we are going back to the overall. And I'm sure a lot of people are interested about the video being available. And Jean-François has been so really great in editing things in and out and then putting it on YouTube. So we do expect to have it in this week, maybe tomorrow or in 2 days.
What will be happening, by the way, is I'm having my brother Michael, who's our technology wizard. He's going to be putting the link to the video each day on the website, because the website lists the different sessions, and it will also have a link to the video.
Right.
So if you want to see it, or if you want to send somebody to look at it, it would be on the front page of the Dilts Strategy Group website.
That's wonderful. That's good to know. So tomorrow, going into the details of the Circle of Success with Colette, will have a guest with her to go through the case study that is deeply displayed in the book. Yep.
She's going to have Tony Nutley, who was actually one of her clients, so you'll get a chance to also hear from the client perspective how what generative consulting did and does for them.
Great. So that was it for today.
Yes, Kathrin is our Swiss. She's our Swiss person. We're actually late Swiss time. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I will certainly be also planning to be touching in tomorrow and each of the other days. So I hope to see you the rest of the week for those of you that come and join us.
Yes, please show up. And as Gudrun said, so good to see also known faces and new faces, and connecting around the world and getting the world out of that, what is so dear to us, the diamond to shine. Yes, as Mariana said.
And the sparkadors are sparkling.
Sparkadors, we're sparking and sparking. And all you too, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.